Seeing the white foam of the Southville beer being placed in front of Sherlock Moriarty, Carlson finally came to his senses. It was only when the bartender was a certain distance away from them did he ask in a suppressed voice, "What do you want?" Klein picked up his glass and took a sip. He took a few seconds to savor the bitter taste of the malt and the faint sweetness from it. "Cheers." He looked sideways at Carlson and smiled before raising his glass. Without hesitation, Carlson shook his head and refused the offer, mumbling, "You have beer while I have strong distilled liquor. It's not suitable for a toast." Klein was only going through the motions, so he once again took a sip of his Southville beer, looked straight ahead, and chuckled. "What I want is very simple. I'm not sure what's inside the tomb, so I can only describe it rather vaguely. Well, I hope that I can choose an item from the spoils of your tomb exploration. I'm not greedy, and my request will not involve high-sequence items. I wouldn't dare take it even if they were one of the options. If you find nothing or there are only high-sequence items, then I don't want anything. Of course, I believe that, when the latter happens, you wouldn't be stingy with giving me a sum of cash that's consistent with my contribution." After hearing about the Ammon family's tomb from Miss Sharon yesterday, he had came up with rough plans. The first plan was to blow the copper whistle, contact Mr. Azek, and join forces to explore the tomb. However, there were many potential problems with this plan. Firstly, he was unsure of the amount of strength Azek, who was still in the midst of finding his lost memories, had regained. Secondly, Azek was being pursued by MI9, so it was very easy for him and Azek to land in trouble. Thirdly, there was a high chance that Klein would end up reappearing in the sites of sealed artifact 008 once again. Of course, he could also consider using the help of the gray fog to make contact or embark on the expedition. However, blowing the copper whistle above the gray fog made it impossible to summon the messenger, therefore, ending all of his subsequent plans. More importantly, Klein didn't dare to reveal the secret of the space above the fog to Azek Eggers, whose identity remained a mystery. Therefore, he finally chose the second method, which was to use his identity as an informant to submit the information to the machinery hivemind and ask for a reasonable reward. When it came to the number of high-sequence Beyonders, which faction could have more than the 7 churches? According to what Klein knew, there were close to 10 high-sequence Beyonders in the Church of the Evernight Goddess. In other words, nearly half of the 13 archbishops and 9 high-ranking deacons had reached or surpassed sequence 4. This wasn't considering the adorer of the goddess, the Pope who helmed the church. Even if the situation regarding the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery was inferior in this aspect, it couldn't be that inferior. Their Archbishop of the Backland Diocese, Hiramic Haydn, was a high-sequence Beyond. And as such, for an Orthodox church, with all its resources accumulated to date, it wouldn't value the mid-sequence items very, very, very much. Klein believed that he could negotiate a reasonable price. Simply put, the core element of the second plan was, find an organization for any difficulty. Upon hearing Klein's offer, Carlson paused for a second, then blurted out, "Aren't you a believer in God?" "I've always had the goddess in my heart." Klein drew a triangular sacred emblem on his chest. "It is because of my belief in God that I've told you this information, not to the Nighthawks through Mr. Stant. God said to let those who wish to be strong be strong. Only by becoming stronger and having more money can I have more access to different channels and resources, and thus provide you with better and more effective information." In order to convince the machinery hivemind, he had specifically spent the morning reading through the Steam and Machinery Bible that he had bought earlier. He then found a few sentences from the deity that met his requirements and memorized them. Carlson was momentarily unable to provide a rejoinder. He just sat there stunned, to the point of forgetting to drink. Seeing this, Klein quickly added, "Moreover, this will help you establish a harmonious and efficient relationship with new generation informants. As long as you spread the news of the rewards I receive as a result of this, as well as keeping your promise without going back on your word, then I believe that the other informants will be deeply moved and be greatly motivated to do their best to gather useful information for you. Of course, I wish that you use my pseudonym when advertising this." Carlson listened with a blank face, picked up his glass and gulped down a mouthful. He almost choked. "Cough. Sherlock, the real you is completely different from what I remember about you from before." He sighed. The detective Sherlock Moriarty in his memories was good at analysis and reasoning. He was extremely calm and polite, and with a great sense of justice, had offered very effective advice. He was an outstanding believer in God. Yet now he was. Klein took a sip of his beer and chuckled. Everyone has their different sides. Using a single facade to face everything is prone to error. This is a problem you have to pay attention to when making deduction. After calming down for a moment, Carlson stood up and said, I have no right to agree to such a request. I will report it immediately, so wait here for a while. All right. Klein waved to the bartender and added a serving of potato wedges. By the time he leisurely finished his food and beer, Carlson returned to the bar with the deacon of the machinery hiveman, Ikenser Bernard. Ikenser looked around, and seeing that there was no one around, he said in a deep voice, There's no problem with your request, but there's one condition to add on. Items with strong side effects and curses are not among the items available for selection. What I want is an ingredient. Klein immediately laughed. All right. Dare I ask again, is this your personal decision or the response from the higher-ups? T have the right to make such a decision. Ikenser used his hat to press down on his fluffy hair. But since it concerns an aristocratic tomb from the fourth epoch, I had sent a telegram to the archbishop, and he didn't object to it in his reply. All right. Klein drew another triangular sacred emblem on his chest. TLL give you the information now. Ikenser shook his head subconsciously. He looked around and pointed to a billiard room. Let's talk inside. This deacon, who is always publicly placed on trial by the mirror called Arrows, is quite experienced. Klein murmured and followed Ikenser and Carlson into the billiard room while making sure that the adjacent rooms were empty. Klein paused for a few seconds and said with some deliberation, The thing is, there was a Beyonder who found a hidden tomb at the mouth of the Stratford River in White Cliff Town. He searched the periphery and found some items. After that, they recruited people and did further explorations, but no one returned. If you search carefully over there, you will definitely find the corresponding traces. After listening carefully, Ikenser asked, Are you sure it's an aristocratic tomb from the fourth epoch? The items on the outside can prove that they're members of the Tudor dynasty's Ammon family, Klein answered truthfully. He then warned him, the Beyonders who died in there weren't weak at all, and there were quite a few of them. I believe that this tomb isn't something that can be explored by those below high-sequence Beyond. Ammon, Ikenser frowned instinctively. It could be seen that, as a deacon, he had the authority to know some ancient secret history. Without waiting for Klein to emphasize it again, he looked up and said, We will collect the relevant information first before we act. A fourth epoch aristocratic tomb is very dangerous. Don't tell this information to anyone else or explore it yourself. Otherwise, you and your friends will only lose their lives. If I dared, I wouldn't be sitting here. Klein gave a self-deprecating laugh and said, My reputation has always been good. After making the deal, he watched Ikenser and Carlson leave before putting on his hat and sauntering out of Lucky Bar. Towards the nobles of the fourth epoch, as well as the Ammon family, the machinery hiveman will still be very cautious. They'll have to have at least several days of preparing before they take action. Prudence. Klein's random thoughts froze on a single word. He thought of another thing that could be described as being prudent. After Roselle had joined the ancient organization suspected of being the Twilight Hermit Order, he had actually never mentioned its name in his own secret diary, which was written in Chinese. Each time, he would refer to it by referring to it with the appropriate characteristics. This level of prudence was a very suspicious phenomenon. Why didn't Emperor Roselle dare to mention the name of that organization, even when it's written in Chinese? This is completely different from the style of writing where he dared to write anything in his diary. What was he afraid of, or what was he worried about? Could it be that as long as he said or wrote down the name of the Twilight Hermit Order, then they would be made aware of it no matter which language he used? As one of their members or a sealed artifact, they possess have such ability. A guess popped up in Klein's mind, but there was no way to confirm it unless he was willing to take the risk. They'll first assume it's true and that I haven't been perceived by them, because the channeling of the Desire Apostle Spirit had been done above the gray fog. Informing Miss Justice of it was also done in response to prayer using the gray fog. Well, it's almost Monday, and I have to remind Miss Justice at the Tarot Club not to say or write down the name, Twilight Hermit Order. As for the reason, she can understand it by herself with me, simply giving her a look. Klein quickly made his next arrangements and strode out of Lucky Bar. Seeing that it was still early, he took a horse carriage to the Quelog Club, intending to spend the afternoon there. As soon as he entered the hall, he saw the equestrian teacher, Talim Duma. This descendant of blue blood was seated in a corner, holding a glass of scarlet grape wine. His face was rosy, and he was sipping it in high spirits. "You seem to be in a good mood, Talum." Klein smiled and greeted him. Talum chuckled and said, "Because the new year is coming." Then rather excitedly he asked, "Sherlock, do you know what it's like to really like someone?" See, Klein showed a fake smile. "Team, sorry, I'm still single." Talum finished the rest of his wine, stood up, waved his hand and said, "That's a pity. Well, I have to get busy. By the way, thank you for introducing Mr. Frommy's cage." Klein recalled the investment of the bike project and sincerely expressed his gratitude. "When are you free these days? I'd like to get you to bring me around to sample some of Backlund's delicacy." After the new year, Talon put on his hat and walked with a smile to the reception hall. As this fellow entered the season of love, Klein couldn't help but mutter. Just as he turned around and took a few steps, he suddenly heard a heavy thud. Klein jerked his head back and saw Talon Dumont on the ground, his left hand clamped tightly at his chest where his heart was. His body was convulsing nonstop. This Klein hurried over. But at this moment, Talon had already spat out all of the white foam on his mouth, losing his last breath of life. In just a few seconds, he had turned into a dead corpse. This wasn't the first time Klein had seen someone familiar die in front of him, but it was the most abrupt and unforeseen death. The expression on Talon Dumont's face when he had asked about what it felt to really like someone was a vivid expression of hidden excitement and flaunting, but one which couldn't be directly shared due to the need of being careful as a result of certain factors. That was too fast. Normal diseases do not cause death so quickly. Klein's expression was solemn as he lightly tapped his molars to activate his spirit vision. He dropped to one knee and crouched down. He saw Talon Dumont's aura and the colors of his emotions fading rapidly. Furthermore, there were strands of black gas wrapped around his heart like a snake, which were gradually dimming. A Beyonder ability similar to Curse. Klein instantly made a preliminary conclusion. At this moment, a nearby red-vested attendant and a servant girl in a black and white dress ran over. They looked at the dead body on the ground in horror. His eyes were wide and round, and the corners of his mouth still had remnant white foam. Klein closed his eyes and instructed in a deep voice, "Go to the nearby police station and tell them someone died here." "Yes, Mr. Moriarty." The red-vested attendant immediately turned around and ran out the door, so flustered that he even forgot to put on his coat. Under the watchful gaze of the crowd, Klein didn't check Talum's belongings, nor did he try to pull out a few strands of hair for a divination attempt when he wasn't around anyone. His identity was already considered semi-official, so he could use the power of the machinery hiveman to conduct a follow-up investigation. There was no need for him to act as a lone hero. Thinking of the many times he had played cards with Talon Dumont, and how he had introduced clients and investors, and the love story that had been hanging in his mind for so long, Klein couldn't help but take a long, slow, deep breath. Who's Talum's murderer? Which Beyonder, whose adept at curses, did Talum offend? Judging from his attitude today, he should be in a very happy and calm state, completely unaware of the fact that he has provoked a terrifying character. Questions flashed through Klein's mind, but his lack of understanding about Talon Dumont resulted in a lack of soil to nurture any inspiration. When the police arrived, he was questioned as a witness, and that wasted quite a bit of his time. It wasn't until all of this was over that Klein had a chance to leave Hillstonborough and head back to Lucky Bar in the Backland Bridge area. Carlson was still there drinking, the only difference being that his drink had been exchanged from a strong distilled liquor made from pure malt to golden, frothy beer. Klein raised his right hand, covered his mouth, and squeezed over. He lightly knocked on the table and said, "Is your job to drink here every day?" Carlson jumped in fright as he turned his head, relaxing only when he saw that it was Sherlock Moriarty. What is it now?" "This reaction is very familiar." Klein sighed silently and said gravely, "There is a case involving Beyonder." Carlson looked around and saw that Lucky Bar already had quite a number of patrons. They were either hollering over their glasses or eager to fight in the ring. "Follow me, let's play a round of billiards." Carlson nudged his thick glasses and carried his beer to an empty billiard room. Klein followed, closing the door behind him. "Your alcohol tolerance seems pretty good," he said in passing. "No, I just drink very slowly." Carlson put down his glass and picked up the cue stick. Then he added inexplicably, "And I'd like some alone time lately." I don't care about that, Klein pursed his lips and said. I encountered a death at the Quelog Club in Hillston. That was a friend of mine, a noble descendant and an equestrian teacher. He's usually healthy and had recently been in a very good mental state, but just now, he suddenly died in front of me. It looked like a heart attack, but my spirit vision told me that he might have been cursed. You're adept at spirit vision? Carlson asked subconsciously. What sort of details did Mr. Stanton fabricate for me? After becoming a machinery hive-mind informant, they never even asked me which pathway I was, or which sequence I'm at, nor did they try to find out about my origins and background. Of course, letting an informant keep certain secrets of their own is also a common tactic used by official organizations, Klein frankly responded. Yes, the chest of the deceased had some decaying, illusory black gas. TT does involve the possibility of a curse and a beyond. Carlson didn't ask further as he slowly nodded. Hillston Borough, that's the territory of our machinery hive-mind. In the northwest of Backland, which was the heart of the metropolis, Empress Borough and Sherwood Backland came under the mandated Punisher's jurisdiction. The western and northern areas came under the Nighthawks, and Hillston Borough and Backland Bridge area came under the machinery hive. Having said this, Carlson looked at Klein and attempted to confirm the detail. What deity does your friend believe in? After thinking carefully for a few seconds, Klein replied hesitantly, the Lord of Storms. A believer of the Lord of Storms, is he the only deceased? Carlson asked with a frown. Yes, Klein gave an affirmative answer. Carlson chalked the cue stick and sighed. We have no right to take the case. This is under the mandated Punishers. But I will pass on your information to them. In the Lone Kingdom, the principle of jurisdiction over Beyonder events was first to divide them according to their beliefs. If they involved the followers of multiple deities, then it would be decided according to who held jurisdiction over the area. Klein was no stranger to this. He had no intention of making things difficult for Carlson, so he earnestly said, Thank you. I hope they can find the real killer as soon as possible. Carlson picked up the glass of beer beside him and took a sip. He's a descendant of blue blood. The mandated Punishers will definitely take it seriously. Pausing for a second, he looked at Klein and said in a low voice, I find it hard to believe that you've only been in Backland for about 3 months. You seem to have established a wide range of social connections and possess lots of resources here. Some people are naturally adept at this. Klein shook his head with a self-deprecating laugh before bidding farewell. By the time he got back to Minsk Street, it was completely dark and the gas lamps lining the streets were being lit by workers. Although his relationship with Talem Dumont didn't go deep, he was an acquaintance he met nearly every week. He was a friend he would play cards with every now and Talem was rather warm and had always exalted him as a great detective. Furthermore, he had practiced what he preached by introducing clients and investors. His passing also made Klein feel sad, making him fully aware of his helplessness towards fate. Other than that, he was also very angry. He was angry at the murderer who had cursed Talem to death. I hope that they can figure out what happened. I hope that the mandated Punishers doesn't run out of manpower because of Duke Negan's assassination case. Klein sighed as he got off the carriage and walked towards the gate. In the process, he discovered that there was no light at the Sammers' house next door. It looks like they're on their way to Daisy Bay. Is this the New Year atmosphere in Backland? Yet I don't feel anything at all. Klein momentarily felt melancholy. With these emotions in mind, he went to bed early and woke up at 7 in the morning. In an attempt to change his mood, Klein decided to bake a homemade cake today. "TLL buy the ingredients after breakfast," he whispered, drinking his milk and flipping through the newspapers. Soon he saw an obituary in the Tussock Times. My beloved son, Talem Dumont, passed away on 18 December due to a sudden heart disease. His funeral will be held at the Crown Cemetery at exactly 9 a.m. on 21 December. In the northern continent, due to reanimations, it was already an ancient tradition to be buried as quickly as possible after one's death. Of course, this was on the premise that there was no shortage of money for a funeral. Sudden heart disease. Is this the final result of the investigation? Or could it be that the mandated Punishers are trying to lull the culprit? Klein frowned, unable to make a judgment. Perhaps I can go above the gray fog to see if it's a trap set up by the mandated Punishers, but there's a high probability of failure. After all, I don't have one of his items with me, nor was I targeted. He took a breath, calmed down, and methodically filled his stomach. The subsequent attempt didn't exceed Klein's expectation. He could only leave Mince Street and take a bus to Hillston Borough to visit Isengard Stanton. The great detective walked in the warm room, pointed to the front and said, "Sherlock, would you like some breakfast? My chef skills aren't worse than mine." "No, I've already had breakfast." Klein shook his head and declined. Isengard stopped in his tracks and casually asked, "Where are you going to spend the new year?" "I'm planning on, no, returning to Lemberg." Haven't confirmed it yet." "Perhaps Midseashire," Klein said perfunctorily. "The scenery there was originally pretty good, but unfortunately, there's an abundance in coal and iron resources. There was also a rather developed shipping industry." Isengard straightened his collar and touched the pipe in his pocket. "You seem to be a little anxious." "Mr. Stanton, I have something to ask you." Klein took the opportunity when asked the question to relate, in detail, Talon Dumont's death, the results of his spirit vision, his advice to the machinery hiveman, and what he had seen in this morning's obituary. Of course, he had hidden the fact that he had become an informant for the machinery hiveman. He only said that for his friend. He had found an official beyonder he got to know due to the Desire Apostle case. "Do you think this is a trap by the mandated punishers?" he finally asked. Holding the pipe, Isengard said thoughtfully, "I've been trying to avoid the mandated punishers, and I don't know enough about the situation. TL get someone to find out. If there's any news, then I'll write to you." "Okay, thank you." Klein bowed sincerely. In the evening, he received a letter specially sent from Isengard. There was only one sentence in the letter: "This case isn't handled by the mandated punisher. The royal family has taken the case by claiming that Talon Dumont is a noble." The royal family. Klein held the letter he received from Isengard Stanton and silently murmured to himself. He looked up and outside the window, and he saw the rain pattering down. The gas lamps on the streets were giving off quiet halo. Inside the living room, the coffee table was neat and tidy, with a few stacks of newspapers placed in the corner. There was silence all around him. Klein sat on the sofa as he leaned forward a little. He sat there silently for a long time. After nearly 10 minutes, he exhaled and shook his head. Slowly and heavily, he tossed the letter into the trash can. He slowly stood up and expressionlessly walked to the second floor. And in the trash can, Isengard Stanton's letter caught fire silently and quickly crumpled into black ashes. On Monday morning, Klein stood in front of the mirror, pressed his right thumb and middle finger to his temples, and rubbed them with a little more strength. When he was done, he turned on the faucet, lowered his body, splashed the cold tap water onto his face, and washed his face while having a fit at the cold. After freshening himself up, he hung up the towel, walked to the first floor, and simply made a single-sided, well-done fried eggs with buttered toast. Of course, a cup of black tea with a few slices of lemon quenched his thirst and reduced the cloy sensation he was feeling. After breakfast, as he was idly flipping through the rest of the newspapers, Klein suddenly heard the tinkling of the doorbell. "Who is it?" "A new commission." Could it be that the machinery hivemind has already finished exploring the Ammon family's tomb? "No, it can't be that fast," Klein muttered as he put away his napkin and newspapers and walked slowly to the door. When he held the handle, the image of the visitor outside the door appeared in his mind. It was an elderly gentleman dressed to a T. His snow-white shirt was starched, and a thick grayish-blue vest completely hid his belly. The long tailcoat had sharp lines without any blemishes on it. The gentleman was wearing a pair of shiny leather shoes, so shiny that it was impossible to tell if he had walked through the rain or mud. He wore a pair of white knitted gloves, with silver hair at his temple. His face was deeply wrinkled, and his light brown eyes were so serious that they didn't contain a hint of a smile. "I don't know him," Klein mumbled and opened the door. "May I know who you're looking for?" he asked politely. The elderly gentleman took off his hat, pressed it to his chest, and saluted in the most standard manner. "Mr. Sherlock Moriarty, I'm a butler who has come to invite you in place of my master." "Do I know your esteemed master? Why is he looking for me?" Klein's head was completely filled with questions. But at this moment, he had already noticed a carriage parked across the cement road. It had a deep black outer shell, and there was a curtain on the inside of the window. It was obvious that it was nothing ordinary. There's luxury amidst being low-key. Klein looked closely and suddenly saw that there was a coat of arms in a conspicuous part of the carriage. The main body of the coat of arms was a vertical sword facing down, and the hilt of the sword had a red crown. That's the Sword of Judgment. It's the Sword of Judgment representing the royal Augustus family. Klein's heart palpitated as he roughly understood the butler's background. Perhaps he's a rather powerful Beyonder, Klein made a guess. The professional and stern butler didn't pay attention to his scrutiny. He revealed a polite smile and said, "You have never met my master, but in a sense, you do know him. You have been providing him clues about the organization that is symbolized by the tarot cards, and he has paid for the money you need. As expected, it's the important figure that Talum mentioned. I've been using false information to fleece for funds, and even submitted all the reimbursements that old Kohler required to him. I can't refuse his invitation now, especially when Talum is dead." Klein pondered for 2 seconds and said, "Did your master come to me due to Talum's death?" "Yes, Talum was his friend. He was sad and confused by his death, and he heard that you were there when it happened," the old butler articulated clearly. "No, I wasn't." Klein subconsciously wanted to deny it, but he ultimately could only nod. "Yes, I saw Talum die in front of me. It's really a sad and regretful thing," the butler said in a sincere tone. "Are you willing to accept my master's invitation? Do I have any reason to refuse? That would just make me look very suspicious. I might even be killed on the spot by you." Klein looked at him and said, "I happen to have nothing planned this morning." "All right then. Mr. Moriarty, please." The old butler bent down slightly, extended his right white-gloved hand, and pointed at the carriage on the opposite side of the cement road. "Si, I've been trying to avoid getting involved with important figures. In the end, I have no choice but to face the person behind Talum after his death. I wonder if this would attract attention or lead to more in-depth background checks. I have to plan ahead and be ready to give up my identity and this foothold at any time. Also, I need to get the human skin shadow characteristic and the deep-sea Naga's hair and advance to faceless as soon as possible. In that case, my ability to resist risks would more than double." When Klein put on his coat and hat and walked to the carriage with the royal coat of arms, he had already thought of the subsequent developments. At this moment, the servant the old butler brought with him opened the door for him. Stepping on the thick brown carpet, Klein looked at the wooden cabinets containing red wine, white wine, champagne, Lanty, and black rand, along with the crystal glasses. Klein felt rather restricted as he sat by the window. Lanty referred to strong distilled spirits made from pure malt. There were many types, such as the sailor's favorite Lanty proof. The bottles displayed in the cabinets were obviously of high quality. As for black rand, they referred to strong distilled wines mixed with other fermented grains, which, like Lanty, was something unique to Loam. As the carriage drove through the wet streets, Klein asked in passing, "Are we going to Empress Borough?" "No, my master's waiting for you at the Red Rose Manor on the outskirts of Empress Borough." The old butler didn't hide anything. "Looks like this is the royal family's manor," Klein thought for a moment, then he asked with a smile, "Can you tell me your master's identity now?" The old housekeeper's back, which was already straight, became even straighter as he raised his chin. "He is the descendant of the founder and protector. He's the grandson of the Might Wielder, the fifth son of His Majesty, Duke of Lastings, His Highness Prince Edisac Augustus. So it's the third prince, the second youngest prince, but he should be around 21 to 22 years old." Klein recalled what he had seen in the occasional descriptions in the newspapers and magazines at the Quelog Club. A horse carriage passed through one street after another, going from an artificial lake to the northwest. After more than an hour, they finally arrived at an extremely large manor. At the entrance to the manor, Klein was inspected by 2 soldiers in red military uniforms and white trousers. He didn't hide the existence of his gun holster and revolver. He believed that there were definitely people around Prince Edisac who could tell that he was carrying a gun, and that it easily made things worse if he fooled them with illusion. "In any case, the prince knows that I'm a private detective, so his subordinates definitely wouldn't send guests to the police station just because I was illegally in possession of a gun." Klein watched as the soldier took the gun holster and revolver before he was informed to take it when he came out. After 2 more inspections, Klein followed the old butler, went around the main house, and came to a wide area with hills and flowing waters. The only drawback of this place was that the vegetation had long since withered away in the dead of winter, leaving nothing but desolation. Taboo, taboo, taboo. Several horses came running from the distance and stopped in front of them. A young man in white trousers, high-heeled black boots, a fitted shirt, and a dark rider's tunic nimbly dismounted and walked over. Everyone else followed closely by his side. He removed his helmet from his head and smiled at Klein. "TM, finally meeting you, Detective Moriarty." Upon seeing this, Klein's eyes lit up. It wasn't because of how handsome he was, but because he looked like the Henry Augustus I imprinted on 5-pound notes. Edisac Augustus also had a rotund face and a pair of slender eyes, but he didn't look serious at all. Instead, he always had a smile on his face, looking young and spirited. "He didn't know that you, Your Highness, were the one who entrusted me with the task." Klein bowed. Holding a horsewhip in his hand, Edisac weighed it in his palm and chuckled. "He heard that you played an important role in the serial killer and Desire Apostle cases. Talam's recommendation was indeed good. Who knew that he would be gone days after I was horse racing with him? He has gone to the kingdom of storm and lightning." Since the founding of the kingdom, the Augustus family had always believed in the Lord of the Storm. Without waiting for Klein to answer, he said with a heavy expression, "The investigation into Talam's death didn't go through me, Mr. Moriarty. I want you to help me discover the truth." The conclusion given by the rest of the royal family. "Your two elder brothers. This sudden level of infighting isn't something I can handle. Also, Your Highness, your style is really direct," Klein sighed. "Team, sorry, but I'd still say that Talam died of a sudden heart disease." "Is that so?" News came from the mandated punishers that a detective by the name of Sherlock Moriarty had testified that Talam had signs of suffering from a curse. Prince Edisac chuckled. Klein could only respond with a wry smile. "Your Highness, you should know the principles I adhere to. I still wish to live another 50 years. "Wasn't Talam your friend?" Prince Edisac asked. Klein was at a loss for an answer when a maid suddenly came from the main room, quickly approached the prince, and whispered a few words. Edisac's face stiffened. "Tell her that she's not to go out." After he finished speaking, he took 2 steps forward. His serious expression softened, and a hint of softness and helplessness appeared in his blue eye. "But I will permit her to leave the room and walk around freely in the manor." The scene before his eyes reminded Klein of the romance story which Talam Dumont had told him. His noble friend had fallen in love with a commoner woman and was insistent on marrying her. However, being in the top circle of the aristocracy, the marriage was absolutely prohibited. Talam had been vexed over this matter, and he had even considered the prospect of hiring a murderer, but in the end, he managed to persuade the woman to leave his friend on her own accord. Could the main character of this story be Edisac Augustus? The situation is very consistent in all aspects. As a prince, marrying a commoner is practically treason in this era. Since the founding of Loan, the spouse of a direct descendant of the Augustus family could only be a noblewoman. From what I've just heard, Edisac has brought that commoner woman back, and he has even grounded her as punishment. Through love in a split second, the story of a tyrannical prince and a pitiful frail white flower took shape in Klein's mind. He looked into the distance, enjoying the midwinter scenery. "That's not what it really looks like. When spring comes and the grass sprouts, you'll see a golf course of the highest quality." Prince Edisac dismissed the maid, raised his whip and pointed around. "Golf?" Klein asked, simultaneously knowing the answer to his question. Prince Edisac motioned his guards and attendants away, leaving the old butler and Klein to follow him by his side. He strolled on the desolate plains, chuckled, and said, "Yes, golf. This is a truly aristocratic sport that even the owners of most magazines and newspapers have a hard time getting involved in." Although I don't like Roselle, I have to admit that the fantasy-like ideas he had have given us a world with plenty of fun. If you can figure out the truth to Talam's death, this place will always be open to you. It was indeed Roselle. Klein let out a light breath. Seeing that he didn't respond, Prince Edisac continued to lament. "There is much to learn from Roselle in every way, but his attitude towards feelings makes me sick." Of course, this is the common nature and style of most of the Inti's aristocrats, and it's also the source of their infatuation with luxury and debauchery in their lives. Looking ahead at the slow stream, Edisac said in a mature tone that was beyond his years, 99% of people are not geniuses like Roselle. In order to succeed and establish a great enterprise, one must first understand what they really want, and for that, they must be willing to pay the price and never turn back while persisting all the way." As he said this, his tone became slow as he laughed at himself and said, "Before this year, I had always thought that I liked the daughter of Earl Hall very much. She has perfect looks and elegant demeanor, a rich fortune, a distinguished family, and a very powerful father. She's someone that no prince can find fault with. But now I understand that what I'm really attracted to is something that I yearn to have even in my dreams. It's a unique temperament and profound soul born from experience. Heh, I'm not saying that Miss Hall is lacking in temperament, but that wasn't what I want, admire, or like. Your Highness, your tone, attitude, and expression are now almost identical to Talon just before he died. Don't suddenly die in front of me. Even if I were to jump into the Tussock Sup 1/Sup River, there's no way for me to prove my innocence. Moreover, hearing much of this makes it easier for me to be silent. You want to tie me to your chariot. Klein felt a little afraid for some baffling reason. He cleared his throat and took the initiative to change the subject. Your Highness, with your status and identity, you will certainly not lack subordinates. There are many people who are willing to investigate Talam's death for you, so why do you need me? Edisac shook his head and chuckled. As a prince, I have as much power as the little freedom I have. There are many things I can't let the people around me do, as there are too many eyes on me. You're a great detective with brains, and you have a good relationship with Talam. You were there at the time, so I don't think there's anyone better suited than you. Don't worry, if there really is a problem, then I can definitely guarantee your safety. Such a promise is like toilet paper in the bathroom. Klein couldn't help but silently lampoon. With Prince Edisac already saying this much, he felt that there was little chance of him leaving Red Rose Manor if he refused again. He could only sigh and say, "Actually, I'm as angry as you are about Talam's death, but reality has kept me calm." Edisac smiled. "What can I do for you?" Talam's hair, either his flesh and blood, plus something he carried around with him. Klein made the request. "Okay, then I'll have these delivered to your house." Edisac agreed at once and then asked curiously, "That's all?" Klein didn't stand on ceremony. "T will only know what kind of help I need when I have a preliminary lead. Your Highness, it's best that you give me a way to communicate with you. A private detective who frequently visits this manor would definitely arouse suspicion." Edisac nodded and said as if he was prepared, "I'll have someone secretly rent the house next door to you, 13 Minsk Street. When you need to make contact, write a letter to your neighbor about visiting and put it in the mailbox. As for the reward, you should know that I'm not a stingy person, even if it ends in failure. As long as you contribute and take the risk, you will still receive the corresponding income. If you do find out the truth, I'll give you a reward sufficient for your retirement." This prince does things really swiftly and decisively. Retirement, that would be at least 3,000 pounds, Klein secretly sighed. "All right, may the spirit of Talon be at peace in the kingdom of storm and lightning." He bowed. Edisac nodded slightly and instructed his elderly butler, "Take Detective Moriarty out and back to Minsk Street. Why don't you keep me for lunch? Aren't you treating your guest in a little too arrogant a manner?" Of course, it probably has to do with it being a long time before noon. Klein silently teased him. He followed the old butler all the way out to the entrance of the manor and retrieved the gun holster, revolver, and the bullets. At 15 Minsk Street, Klein stood at the oriel window and watched the carriage with the royal coat of arms drive away. Sherlock Moriarty might die at any moment if the investigations really goes deeper. Who knows, someone might be watching me right now. Not for now, since I haven't made any moves yet. Klein frowned and stood still. At this moment, he was extremely eager to advance to Faceless. I can't afford to wait for the machinery hivemind's exploration of the Ammon family's tomb. I have to continue trying to buy the human-skinned, shadow characteristic via other channels. After all, no one knows how long the machinery hivemind's preparations will take. What if it exceeds a month or even half a year? That's not impossible. They can first send people to guard the entrance and slowly gather the corresponding information so as to be certain that nothing goes wrong. It's not a bad strategy, but that's not something that I can afford to wait for. As thoughts raced through Klein's mind, he made his decision. At 2:45 p.m., he brought his newspaper into the bathroom and actively prepared for this week's tarot gathering. 3 o'clock sharp. A deep red illusory radiance rose as Audrey Hall looked around in a good mood. Last night, she had finally received the sequence 7 psychiatrist potion formula she had been dreaming of. Her emotions were still a mix of excitement, agitation, and serenity. Furthermore, the psychology alchemists hadn't immediately asked her to make any contributions, claiming that it was an advance. They had full confidence in Miss Audrey's outstanding ability to repay them. No new members, Audrey stood up and gazed at the very end of the long bronze table. She raised the corners of her skirt and bowed. "Good afternoon, Mr. Fool Tilda, good afternoon." Her light and cheerful voice broke the unchanging silence above the fog, and it allowed Klein, who had been feeling a little depressed, to temporarily be rid of the troubles that the outside world had on him. He nodded slightly and responded to the member's greeting. When she sat down again, Audrey brought the other members into view and created a dynamic scene with the previous observation. When bowing, Mr. Hanged Man silently sized up Mr. Fool with inconspicuous curiosity. Then he looked towards Mr. World in anticipation. In other words, with him having a deep relationship with the Church of the Lord of Storms, he knows about the details of Duke Negan's assassination and is aware of the appearance of hero bandit Dark Emperor. He has the desire to investigate the hidden truth behind this matter. There appears to be an outcome regarding the werewolf Bayonder characteristic which Mr. World had entrusted him to sell, and he has also probably found the human skin shadow characteristics or the deep-sea Naga's hair. The son's emotions are very stable and relaxed. This means that he believes that the City of Silver's surveillance on him has been lifted. What did he rely on to make this judgment? Has he been reallocated to the so-called exploratory team? Fours is a little depressed despite feeling relaxed. She passed the Abraham family member's test and has become his student, but she was forced to accept something that was disadvantageous to her. Mr. World is as cold and deep as ever. Perhaps when I reach sequence 7 or 6, I'll be able to grasp his emotional changes and thoughts. Well, the Fool is still as mysterious, powerful, and unfathomable. A series of thoughts flashed through Audrey's mind. She looked at the figure shrouded in the gray fog and said, "Honorable Mr. Fool, I have obtained 3 new pages of Roselle's diary." It was a copy she had requested from the psychology alchemist. However, as she had only mentioned it last night, Escalante only had the time to give her 3 pages in such short notice. "What kind of reward do you want?" Klein asked with a smile. Audrey replied sincerely, "Can you just treat it as the reward for answering my previous question?" As she said this, she had an inexplicable feeling of flaunting herself. "Mr. Hanged Man and the rest of you still don't know the existence of the Twilight Hermit Order. Phew, how envious. I wonder what problem did Miss Justice seek guidance for in private. I'll write to teacher when I get back, and I'll ask him if he has Roselle's diary. No, to the outside world, nope." Fors immediately had the desire and motivation. Under the Hanged Man's suspicious gaze, Klein nodded without any care. "Sure." Audrey quickly produced 3 pages of tawny diary entries and passed them on to Mr. Fool. Klein took them and read them. On the first page it wrote, 13th January, contact with Mr. Door stabilized. Just as Klein picked up the diary, Audrey added, "Mr. Fool, I still have 10 diary pages which will be given to you later. It is for the payment for your previous blessing." She repeated her private promise so as to not let Mr. Fool think that she had forgotten about it, and the reason why she had provided payment for the information regarding the Twilight Hermit Order was to first settle the debt, while having the intention to show off a little. The payment for the blessing. Fors ruminated over these words and suddenly realized an important oversight on her part. On the matter regarding the Abraham family, Mr. Fool had sent his angel to help me interfere with the divination. I should have paid an appropriate amount. Oh no, I didn't realize this at all. I thought, like all rituals, that it was the end to it once it was completed. For a moment, Fors fell into a panic. During ordinary ritualistic magic, if one prayed for help from a deity or a corresponding existence, they would perform a sacrifice in advance. Burning essential oils, extracts, and herbal essence that pleased the target was equivalent to making an advance payment. But in the rituals corresponding to the Fool, there were many steps that could be omitted, and the price could only be paid afterward. Sometimes there wasn't even a need to offer anything. Fors, who was accustomed to the former, ended up only saying a word of thanks. She hurriedly looked towards the end of the long bronze table and earnestly said, "Honorable Mr. Fool, your divination interference had helped me greatly. I will try to find 10 Roselle diary pages as soon as possible as well." Seeing the performance of Miss Justice and Miss Magician, it dawned on Derek Berg that he had found a way to fully express his gratitude. However, the City of Silver doesn't have the diary pages of the so-called Emperor Roselle. Well, Mr. Fool is very interested in history, so I'll have to read more books and records on these. With a thought, Derek made a promise to Mr. Fool, who sat high above them. The Hanged Man watched all this from the side, and had no doubt that the Fool had an angel at his service. Any organization should have a character like Miss Justice. The power of a role model is limitless. With a lot of debts to collect appearing out of thin air, Klein happily sighed inwardly. As the high and mighty Mr. Fool, he always found it awkward to directly ask for compensation, and he had always believed that helping the members of his own organization was a normal and reasonable thing to do, without the need for him to make it so reliant on transaction. Thus, he didn't control the world to put on the appropriate performance to remind everyone. Of course, if Justice and the others were willing to provide payment, then Klein had no intention of refusing it. All right. He smiled and nodded before shifting his gaze back to the diary in his hand. 13th January, contact with Mr. Door stabilized. The powerful Beyonder, who's lost in the darkness and trapped in the storm, didn't rush me to complete a complicated and difficult ritual so as to help him return to the real world. He seems to have understood that he has to come up with something that would move me, instead of giving me 3 intangible wishes, in order for me to consider whether I should take the hidden risks of saving him. Mr. Door temporarily didn't mention this matter, and instead, with great interest, chatted about my tarot card creation. The word creation should be written with quotation marks. From this point, it's apparent that Mr. Door is able to make contact with the real world at particular times and through particular methods, and he should be able to observe a lot of details. While talking about the moon card, I thought of a matter Zeratul mentioned. He said that the life school of thought worships the moon, but not the Evernight goddess. Yes, I added the second half myself. Hence I asked the fourth epic expert, Mr. Door, about this question. He chuckled and similarly didn't give a direct answer. However, compared to the furtive seer who speaks half-truths, making me want to beat him up, he's a lot more frank. He told me that if he were to choose a card from the tarot cards to represent the Evernight goddess, he wouldn't choose the moon, but the star. That makes things very interesting. I pressed, who is the real owner of the moon? His reply was even more worthy of relish. He said with a laugh that the moon currently has no owner. TF, I didn't misunderstand him. Then he means that the peak of the moon's pathway is empty. The sequence 0 is empty. That's not right. Isn't there a primordial moon? Upon seeing this, Klein suddenly had this thought. He had already anticipated that the moon card didn't represent the goddess. Whether it was the faith of the life school of thought, the attitude of the vampires, or the records in the Book of Secrets, they all vaguely pointed out that Evernight wasn't the moon. In contrast, vampire ancestor Lilith and the primordial moon resembled the sequence 0 of this pathway in more ways. According to the City of Silver's history lessons, Lilith had most likely fallen in the Dark Epoch, the second epoch. However, the primordial moon was an existence that people still believed in and sent responses to even to this day. Of course, those who prayed to her wouldn't end up well. Why did Mr. Door say that the moon had no owner at the moment? As seen from the Book of Secrets, the primordial moon still existed during the fourth epoch. Klein almost frowned. Soon he came up with 3 guesses. First, Mr. Door didn't know enough about the hidden primordial moon, but that was a very low possibility. Second, that the primordial moon was actually the disguise of another deity, not essentially occupying the position of the moon sequence 0 pathway. Third, that she was a sequence 1 of the moon's pathway or was in disguise and had the corresponding sealed artifact. And one more possibility, it's the response from the moon pathway's uniqueness. Klein muttered silently. The most important Beyonder ingredient in the sequence 0 potion formula described by the Dark Emperor card wasn't all of the sequence 1 Beyonder characteristics, but something called uniqueness. Different pathways had different uniquenesses. A true god was unique. Other than the first guess, the other possibilities aren't small. What is the Beyonder pathway of the moon? Klein turned to the second page of the diary and was lucky enough to discover that it was connected to the previous page. T continued pressing, but Mr. Door refused to say more. He thinks that I'll rescue him by whetting my appetite. Dream on. T hid my curiosity and scoffed at Mr. Door for not being respectful enough to true God. He casually replied to me. This is the attitude a fourth epoch noble has to the deity. This guy is too good at acting. However, I really am interested in the nobility of the fourth epoch, so I took the opportunity to ask. Mr. Door told me that in the Tudor dynasty there were 5 noble families: Abraham, Antigonus, Ammon, Tamara, and Jacob. Each family was known as an angel family, and they possessed tremendously terrifying strength. Angel family, just the name itself raises many problems. It really makes one yearn for it. Mr. Dorr said that the number of angel families in the fourth epoch exceeded the five. There were the Zaratul and Zoroast family, which had always been loyal to the Solomon Empire, the Augustus, Sauron, Einhorn, Castia families of the Trunsos dynasty, and the Furtive and Dariel and Berea families, as well as the Demoness family which stemmed from a true goddess which was one step up from the angel family. So the last winner of the fourth epoch was the Trunsos dynasty, but where did their royal family go? The four angel families, Augustus, Sauron, and the others, divided up the northern continent. Just as Mr. Dorr said the previous time, the strongest powerhouses in the fourth epoch far exceeds my imagination. However, most of them have been buried in the ashes of history. Even the Sauron family has waned, destroyed by me. In another 1 to 2 millennia, perhaps the Augustus family might no longer exist. Only the true gods appear capable of forever illuminating the real world. Although some deities perished in the fourth epoch, they should only be few in number. This makes me think of something that was previously written in a web novel which I memorized. It can be used here with some changes. Ashes await those who fail to become true God. After the communication period ended, Mr. Dorr disconnected. He's like a prisoner who's released on parole for a fixed period of time. And he does know a lot. When he mentioned the Zaratul family, there was faint contempt in his tone. Perhaps I need to maintain my relationship with Mr. Dorr. Apart from the Church of the God of Steam, Zaratul, and that secret and ancient organization, I should leave another outlet. Unlike the saying, a wily hare has far more than 3 holes. When Emperor Roselle was struggling in the end, he was only thinking about the organization that's suspected to be the Twilight Hermit Order. He didn't mention Mr. Dorr at all. Something apparently happened in between, so the ancestor of the lone royal family, the Augustus family, was actually so rich and powerful to be an angel family. However, why did the royal family of the Trunsos dynasty, to which they were loyal to, disappear just like that? Klein suddenly thought of a few things, and his desire to clear away the fog that shrouded the history of the fourth epoch and see its true appearance grew. This was also the greatest hobby of his body's original owner. Perhaps that underground relic with 2 side-by-side seats and a terrifying evil spirit will help me answer a lot of questions. Klein lowered his gaze and flipped to the 3rd page. 2nd June, Bernadette massaged my back. It's good to have a daughter. She knows to care for her old father, and although I can see what she wants at a glance, at least she's willing to put on an act. Besides, she did a good job. He asked her which Beyonder pathway she wanted. She said she was undecided, but she liked the maxim of do as you wish, but do no harm. 3rd June. I saw Florin again. He's very different from before, as though he's a different person. No, he still had his original memories and some of his distinctive characteristics, which is enough to prove that he's him. What exactly happened to him to experience such a huge change? Perhaps a metaphor could be used to describe it more precisely. Some monsters are physical sutures, while he is a monster of mental suture. SDA June. I obtained an ancient book. It actually mentions the primordial demoness's name, not one of an honorific name. Her name is Cheek, but that's a man's name. Is this ancient book fake? And Grace Cheek. Was the primordial demoness also a man in the past? Klein almost raised his hand to his chin. He had once guessed that it was because of the existence of the evil goddess, the primordial demoness, that led to the assassin pathway having members of the opposite sex turn into a female after sequence 7. Who knew that Roselle's diary would indicate that the primordial demoness might have been a male in the beginning as well? This depicted 2 problems. First, the primordial demoness wasn't a naturally born deity, and they had only relied on potions to reach sequence 0. Second, the purely feminine changes in this pathway were inherent in its Beyonder characteristics. Roselle had once speculated about the truth behind the law of Beyonder characteristics conservation. He suspected that all Beyonder characteristics originated from the original creator, so there's no increase, and that the total amount is conserved. Assuming that this is true, does this mean that the creator who created everything is all-inclusive, masculinity, femininity, and gender-neutral all in one, and the demoness pathway is a representation of pure femininity? Of course, that ancient book might actually be fake. There's a lot of information in Roselle's diary entries today. With thoughts flashing through his mind, Klein let the diary disappear in his hand. "You can begin," he smiled and said to Justice, the son, and the others. Alger looked towards the world immediately. "Your werewolf characteristic has been sold. An artisan paid £1,200 for it. According to our agreement, I will receive £200. Also, I found clues to the hair of a deep-sea naga. £100 a strand, and you want 5 of them in total. If you're fine with this deal, then I will complete it as soon as possible." Klein had promised a higher share of the werewolf's Bay-Under characteristic, because he knew that the hanged man had spent more effort and taken on a risk that far exceeded what vampire Emlyn White had spent. At this point, he thought for a moment and controlled the world to reply. "No problem. Give me the 5 strands of deep-sea naga hairs and £500 in cash as soon as possible. Now only the human skin shadow characteristic remains, and the amount of money I have has increased to £1,235, which isn't enough. If I don't want to wait for the machinery hivemind's exploration of the Ammon family's mausoleum, I'd have to wait to receive another £500 to £1,000 before I can buy it immediately when I see it." Klein subconsciously wondered what other items or knowledge he could use to exchange for money. Of course, this was on the premise that the target of these transactions was able to pay the remuneration in cash. Hearing this, Audrey raised her hand very slightly, and without hiding anything, she said, "I'd like to purchase 3 ingredients: a pair of eyes from a mirror dragon, 50 milliliters of its blood, as well as a fruit from the tree of elders." Miss Justice has gotten the formula for the psychiatrist potion. Klein made this judgment in an instant, and the hanged man came to a similar conclusion. "We'll write to my teacher and ask him if he has one of these ingredients." Forrest thought for a moment. Derek nodded and said, "Teal, also take note. Corroded mirror dragons aren't rare, same for the tree of elders. In the City of Silver, there's also the Bay-Under characteristic left behind by a psychoanalyst. However, it's hard to make transactions for them, and it's easy to be suspected." Psychoanalyst was the ancient name of psychiatrist. When their conversation reached Klein's ears, he immediately manipulated the world and made the dummy hoarsely and gloomily say, "I'll ask around in my circle. All right, continue helping me find the human skin shadow characteristic." "All right." Audrey confidently turned her head to face the person opposite her. "Mr. Hanged Man, it'll also look out for the wind-blessed potion formula you need." She had already joined the psychology alchemists and had a secret organization backing her. With them, many ingredients were no longer in short supply. She could obtain them as long as she paid the necessary price. Forrest repeated, "I'll write to my teacher and ask." Upon seeing this development, Klein felt rather gratified. After a long period of hard work, the Tarot Club had finally developed 2 major channels, the Psychology Alchemists and the Abraham family. Many things would become simple. The world chuckled and said, "Your answers fill me with hope, but you must also take care to protect yourselves and proceed in a way that would avoid arousing suspicion as much as possible. Mr. World, you rarely talk so much." Audrey smiled in reply. Got a little too pleased and momentarily forgot the world's original character profile. Klein immediately remedied the situation and made the world chuckle and say, "All of you have become sufficiently valuable. I hope that this kind of transaction can last for a very, very long time. That's why I'm reminding you." "Thank you," Audrey gracefully expressed her gratitude. At that moment, Derek hesitated and said, "I'll give it a try as well. I've recently completed several patrol missions, but there's nothing out of the ordinary." "Very good," Klein said to himself, making the world shut his mouth. After a brief moment of silence, Alger looked thoughtfully at Miss Justice. "T would like to know the details of the assassination of Duke Negan. What kind of reward do you need?" "Why ask me? As someone close to the Church of the Lord of Storms, shouldn't you already know the full details of this case?" Audrey was surprised for a moment, but then she understood the meaning of Mr. Hanged Man's words. He wants to ask about the organization or force that instigated the Desire Apostle, but he doesn't think it's right to ask the fool directly, thinking that it would be too sudden and invasive. So he took a roundabout way by asking me to open up the topic, gently shifting the focus to the things he wants to know. He knows that I'm a noble lady and that I should pay attention to the assassination of Duke Negan. So he's not worried that I won't answer him. Mr. Hanged Man is really experienced," Audrey said, with the corners of her mouth curling up slightly. "No, there's no need for compensation. Isn't it the purpose of our tarot club to freely exchange common knowledge amongst each other regarding their respective region. Only by doing so can our tarot club expand at a rapid pace. She thought to herself quite possessively. Your words shame me. Alger was stunned for a moment before he pressed his hand to his chest and leaned forward a little. T4. Klein, who was shrouded in the thick gray fog, inwardly laughed dryly. Audrey lightly pursed her lips, weighed her words, and said, the Desire Apostle used a unique situation to complete the assassination of Duke Negan, by using his ability to trigger intense emotions and desires, and at the cost of serious injuries, he successfully broke out of the encirclement, entering the sewer. When the Nighthawks caught up to him, he was already dead. Hero Bandit Dark Emperor was present. This gentleman didn't do it to silence him, but to target the organization that entrusted the assassination contract to the Desire Apostle. Which organization? Just as the hanged man was wondering to himself in puzzlement, the fool, who was sitting at the end of the table, silently praised Miss Justice and looked at her. He then gave her a reminder in passing. In the outside world, do not mention the name of the organization or write it down. Why? Audrey blurted out in astonishment. Klein leaned back in his chair and replied in a gentle voice, any mention of it will be known. Any mention of it will be known. Audrey subconsciously looked at Mr. Fool, only to feel that he seemed to be emphasizing something with his eyes hidden in the fog. Mr. Fool is implying that if it's not in his kingdom or through talking to him, mentioning or writing down the name of the Twilight Hermit Order would allow them to sense it via some means or item. That should be what he means. What an extremely secretive and high-level organization. To a certain extent, it's even more terrifying than the Church of the Seven Deities, and Mr. Fool, our tarot club, is looking for them. Audrey instantly felt like she understood a lot of things. She straightened her back and said, as you command. Any mention of it will be known. A secret organization whose name can't even be mentioned. A powerful organization that I don't know of at all. Is this the faction behind the Desire Apostle? Mr. Fool had sent his adorer to search for them. This high-level situation in the world really is more complicated than I thought. There are even more secrets that I have no way of knowing. Alger slightly nodded his head, feeling both shocked and agitated at the same time. At this moment, he had the urge to pay Mr. Fool for the name of the organization. However, after thinking about it carefully, he felt that there was no need for that. Although understanding the situation involving the higher-level entities would help him perfect his plans for the future and play an important role in certain situations, he, who was currently at the bottom of the mid-sequence levels, had no way of making contact with matters related to the mysterious organization. What he needed the most right now was the formula and ingredients for Wind Blessed, so he had to save up enough wealth for them. After succeeding my advancement, I could seek an opportunity to consult Mr. Fool. Alger made a note of this. Forz was confused by what she heard. Things like the Desire Apostle and the organization in which any mention of it will be known were completely different from what she had read in the newspapers. There are indeed many secrets behind the assassination of a duke. It's a pity that the organization's name cannot be written down. Otherwise, I can use it as the villain of a future novel. It will definitely be a classic. I still owe 10 diary pages and haven't bought the Spirit Eater's stomach pouch. There's no need to spend the money in order to understand such high-end matters for the time being. Well, the secrecy and knowledge circulating in the Tarot Club are 10 times greater than Mr. A's gathering, or more. Forz restrained her curiosity as a writer. As for Derek, he didn't know who Duke Negan was, so he didn't care who was behind the assassination. He sat silently and was reserved, as though he were in class. When the matter regarding the Twilight Hermit Order was over, Forz looked around and probingly asked, Lady and gentlemen, do you have a way to solve the problem of accumulating too many Beyonder characteristics of the same level? Mission Alger looked at Forz and returned with a question. You were forced to drink a second apprentice potion. Why did you figure it out so easily? It's as though you were there to see it. Forz uncomfortably cleared her throat and said, Yes, let's just pretend that's what happened. What solutions do you have? What do you need me to exchange for it? Alger glanced at Mr. Fool, but seeing that he had nothing to say, he replied in a calm and low voice, You don't need payment, because it will certainly not be able to satisfy your needs. Without waiting for Miss Magician and Miss Justice to ask, he casually explained, High-sequence Beyonders can independently decide whether or not to pass on their Beyonder characteristics to their descendants, and how much they will inherit as a result. Sequence 6 and Sequence 5 will naturally pass a part of it in an uncontrollable manner. Although the quantity isn't a lot each time and wouldn't affect the Beyonder's strength, their sequence will regress if they have enough children. Such a child is born with high spiritual perception and a certain level of incomplete Beyonder power. Audrey suddenly came to a realization, understanding the origins of some special people. The Hanged Man nodded. Yes, they're equivalent to half a sequence 9, with a certain amount of characteristic. If they want to become a Beyonder, they can only choose the corresponding path. Of course, such people might not be a result of inheritance. It might be the result of them gaining the blessings of a deity or the corruption of an evil spirit. There are many factors that can cause the same degree of influence. Also, when high sequence Beyonders have children, they might give birth to someone who's already at sequence 5. This is one of the rare instances when one can advance without losing control. So that's how it is. Audrey sighed with satisfaction. To her, knowing more mysteries was more enjoyable than getting a nice dress or jewelry. Forz also came to a realization as she pressed. Then what about Beyonders at sequence 7, 8, and 9? Theoretically speaking, their Beyonder characteristics will not be passed down to their descendants, but that is not absolute. If there's an excessive amount of Beyonder characteristics, there's a chance for them to be passed down as well. That is to say, if you're pregnant with a child, there's a way to effectively reduce the remnant potion in your body. No, one might not succeed, but 3 or 4 will stand a higher chance. 3 or 4. Forz stared agape. Klein, who had learned all of this general knowledge from Roselle's diary, couldn't help but think of a joke. Miss Magician, in the future, you can say to your child that you were a free gift won from drinking a potion. Although it seems that, according to Mr. Hanged Man, the burden can be reduced the moment a child is conceived. Having a child would still require almost 40 weeks of trouble. No more than that, it's impossible to leave the child after it's born, right, after grasping the acting method. Even if the process subsequently becomes more difficult, 2 months will definitely be enough time to digest it. It might not even take that long after all, it's just a starting sequence. Forz forced a smile and said, I understand, the best way is still to rely on acting to digest it. Alger gave an affirmative answer. That's the case for sequence 7 and below. After that, digestion would easily take a year or so, 2 to 3 years, and then 5 to 6 years. When that happens, giving birth to a child would be a simpler plan, he added inwardly. There were a few seconds of silence as the two women digested the knowledge they had just gained. This was the first time they had known that having a child had such uses. For Derek, this was common knowledge. He adjusted his posture and said, I've been assigned another exploration mission. Where to? Alger tilted his head and asked. TT still the half-destroyed temple of the fallen creator, Derek answered without sounding too gray. It sounds like there's a certain guaranteed level of safety. Audrey didn't interrupt. The Hanged Man pondered for 2 seconds before asking, Is the Shepherd Elder still in prison? Yes. This exploration will be led by the chief. The son didn't hide the facts. This way, the danger level will be much lower than last time. You can give it a try. Alger couldn't help but look at Mr. Fool once more. Unable to read any thoughts from the other party's blurry eyes, he continued to speak to the son. This should be your last inspection, before the surveillance is completely removed. Previously, the information you made known was that Ammon is arch-enemies with the fallen creator. They wouldn't mind exposing themselves to spoil the other's plan. This time, by heading to the fallen creator's temple for exploration, as long as you don't reveal any abnormalities, the 6-member council will basically determine that you're no longer under Ammon's influence. Mr. Hangman sure is experienced. It's as if he was planning the operation. Derek kept it in mind before asking, what else do I need to pay attention to? At the very end of the long bronze table, the fool, who was quietly watching, opened his mouth. Flesh and blood ravings. Klein had only said 2 words, leaving the Tarot Club members to comprehend them on their own. This was the demeanor of a great figure. The Hanged Man pondered for a few seconds. Then he said to the son who had thanked the fool, in particular, don't look at what you shouldn't, don't listen to what you shouldn't, don't eat what you shouldn't, and don't touch what you shouldn't. What are those that shouldn't be seen or heard? Derek asked, puzzled. The Hanged Man said with a deepened voice, after entering the temple, everything is included. Then how should I explore? Derek asked in surprise. The Hanged Man chuckled. Aren't there other members? Isn't there a chief? It really is Mr. Hanged man style, Audrey subconsciously wanted to cover her face with her hands, but the education and habits ingrained in her had told her that such actions weren't graceful, so she forcefully changed the way she moved, stroking her drooping hair and pushing it behind her ear. 74. The son felt that such a method was quite unacceptable. Upon noticing his reaction, Alger secretly cursed before saying, "What I mean is to listen to your chief's instruction. Only do what he allows you to do. At any other times, do not take matters into your own hands. T understand?" "Thank you, Mr. Hanged man." The son instantly relaxed. "Phew." Alger exhaled and turned to the woman opposite him. "Miss Justice, I wish to know the political changes in Backland after Duke Negan's passing." Audrey recalled the information she had heard, both directly and indirectly in recent times. Duke Negan's death has divided the House of Lords. Although his eldest son is about to inherit the nobility title and become a member of the House of Lords, his prestige isn't enough to calm the dispute. Nearly 10 members of the House of Lords have jointly proposed that the newly conferred nobility should also have a chance to obtain a fixed seat as a member of Parliament. Simply put, let those who are conferred nobility through political donations, charity donations, and the purchase of land become members of the House of Lords. Hearing this, the hanged man Alger laughed. Aren't nobles with a certain amount of history in their family line the ones who despise such people who rely on unorthodox means to be conferred a nobility title the most? Wasn't the ultimate honor and their greatest pride the fact that a fixed seat in the House of Lords was hereditary? Ignoring the inadvertent mockery, Audrey calmly explained, "When you have tens of thousands of pounds, hundreds of thousands of pounds, or even more debts, you will also make the same choice." Owing money wasn't a fatal threat to many nobles, but the debtor could apply to the court and use their lands as payment for the debts. Without the minimum amount of land needed for a noble title, their status as nobles would be on the verge of collapse. And then, Alger didn't continue to harp over the previous question. Audrey gave a rough description. This kind of dispute has put many bills on hold, including but not limited to the raising of worker salary, the improvement of working hours, and revising the poor law. It's gratifying to see that the Civil Servant Unified Examination is still progressing steadily and hasn't stopped, and the investigation into the air pollution in Backland is also going in depth. "There will be no war for the time being," the hanged man whispered, and he went on to talk to the other members. Worried that staying too long in the bathroom would arouse suspicion, Klein announced the end of the tarot gathering after they were done. After returning to her room, Audrey didn't rush to get up. She first quietly sorted out the things she needed to do after that. Looking at the mirror in front of her, she played with the accessories on her earlobes. With a slight smile, she silently muttered to herself, "There will be a psychology lesson tomorrow afternoon. I can tell Miss Escalante that I've met someone in a Beyonder circle who's looking to buy the human skin shadow characteristic and has promised an abnormally generous price for it. I wonder if the psychology alchemist will be interested in it or not. Also, I mustn't forget Roselle's diary and the wind-blessed formula. Yes, I have to find the psychiatrist ingredients as quickly as possible. Audrey, you can't be lazy. Susie is already a sequence 8, so you can't let her overtake you." After pacing back and forth in the room, Forbes finally made up her mind and pulled out her chair. She grabbed a piece of paper and a pen, and after mulling over it for nearly a minute, began to write to Dorian Gray. She described how she learned of someone who requested the characteristic of a human skin shadow and the wind-blessed potion formula, as well as her curiosity over the Roselle note. The capital of the Rorsted Archipelago, the city of generosity. Alger Wilson walked out of the hotel and headed for a secret underground market. His target was the hair of a deep-sea naga. He had no intention of missing a human skin shadow if someone had it. "I'm short on money." Klein sat in the living room and sighed again. He still needed quite a bit of cash to ensure that he could purchase the items directly when he received clues regarding the human skin shadow's characteristic. Klein thought for a long time, wondering if he should find other channels to sell the Beyonder characteristic left by the interrogator and stop waiting for Miss Zio to save up her money. After an unknown period of time, the sound of the doorbell rang, breaking the afternoon silence. Performance: the visitor was a man in a dark green postman uniform. He smiled at Klein in a fawning manner. "Are you Mr. Sherlock Moriarty?" he asked. "Yes." Klein could vaguely guess the purpose of the other person's visit. The visitor raised his right hand and handed over a palm-sized item that was wrapped in layers of black gauze. "Please sign and accept your package." Klein deliberately revealed his doubts. "Shouldn't you give me a slip and let me go to the corresponding post office for collection?" The Lone Kingdom's postal system was a perfect replica of the Indie system, and even the flaws were copied quite significantly. Anything that couldn't be stuffed directly into the mailbox, no matter what it was, would only be given a collection slip by the postman, making the recipient go through the hassle of collecting it himself. "Haha, because it's rather precious, so I have to personally deliver it to you," the postman said after a momentary shock. "It seems you're not professional enough to be a real postman." Without further questions, Klein accepted the package, pen, and slip before signing them. He closed the door and returned to the living room. He didn't rush to open the package, but he took out a gold coin and threw it into the air. "Puh!" Klein caught the gold coin and looked down to see if it was heads or tail. A number faced up, indicating a negative response. "There's no latent danger." Klein nodded slightly and put away the gold coin. He touched the paper figurine in his pocket and carefully opened the packet. After one layer after another of black gauze was removed, the objects inside clearly presented themselves to him. They were a pale gold-colored, elegantly patterned pocket watch, a handkerchief stained with dark red blood, 7 or 8 brown short curly hair tied together, and a stack of notes. Talam's belongings, his hair, his blood, and his daily records are all present. Prince Edisac sure is a very efficient man. It's not even nighttime. Klein looked at the items on the coffee table and suddenly felt that there were many people staring at him at that very moment. An ancient angel family with a heritage of more than 2,000 years would definitely have an unimaginable background. Being involved with the royal family's internal strife makes it possible for me to be pulverized at any moment and anywhere. Maybe I'm already being monitored now. I have to appear mediocre and useless enough to ensure my safety. Klein had already decided what to do, so he took his time checking the pocket watch, handkerchief, and hair. During this process, his spiritual intuition didn't give him any warnings, nor did it prevent him from attempting divination. After having a better grasp on the situation, Klein took out the letter, picked up a pen, and wrote his divination sentence: "The true cause of Talam Dumont's death." He acted big-hearted and poised, as though he didn't feel that he was being monitored at that very moment. Picking up the curly hair and handkerchief, Klein chanted the divination sentence while leaning back against the back of the sofa. His eyes turned deep as he entered cogitation. After repeating it 7 times, he came to the dream world and saw the familiar lobby of the Quelog Club. And then he saw Talam Duman clutch at his heart, his face contorted once again. This revelation shows that Talam did die of a sudden heart disease. Klein opened his eyes and muttered softly to himself. He frowned, wearing a puzzled, confused, and thoughtful expression. He tried several different divination statements and received the same result. He got up and paced back and forth several times. He punched himself in the head, as though he was angry that he wasn't good enough to help his friend or find out who the culprit was. In the end, he dejectedly sat down and didn't move for a long time. In the dark room, he was like the silhouette of a stone statue. That should be enough. I can't go overboard if there's no one monitoring me, then I would have been fighting with the air just now. Klein shook his head in a self-deprecating manner, got up, and walked to the kitchen. After dinner, he seemed to perk up again before he read the stack of notes carefully, including what Talam had done and who he had met on the day, and the days prior to his death. Home, Red Rose Manor, Quelog Club, Viscount Conrad's mansion. There's nothing out of the ordinary about it. Klein picked up a sharpened pencil and drew circles, marking out the places he would visit and the targets he would ask about in the next few days. After doing all of this, he let out a long sigh. Without confidence, he packed up his things, washed up, and went to bed. In the middle of the night, when the red moon was hidden by layers of clouds, Klein suddenly opened his eyes and woke up. He got out of bed, opened the door slowly, and went into the bathroom next door, hiding himself with a paper figurine substitute in the process. Walking 4 steps counterclockwise, he arrived above the gray fog and sat down at the seat which belonged to the fool. His eyes had become clear, no longer dispirited, dejected, and pessimistic. Soon after, Klein took the blood-stained handkerchief from a hidden pocket in his pajamas made out of old clothes. When he was packing his things, he had used his Beyonder powers as a magician to hide the handkerchief on his body. After taking a deep breath, Klein conjured a pen and paper, and he wrote down the divination sentence that was no different from the beginning. the true cause of Talem Dumont's death. After he repeated it 7 times with his body and mind in peace and quiet, he leaned back in his chair with the paper and handkerchief in his hand and fell asleep in the silent and empty old palace. In a gray, separated, and illusory world, Klein saw a completely different scene from before. Presented before his eyes was a palm-sized wooden puppet, carved with eyes, a nose, and a mouth. There were a few drops of dark red blood on the puppet's body, giving it a demonic appearance. A palm stretched out. The skin was white and exquisite, smooth and beautiful, with 5 slender and delicate fingers that accentuated the hand's flesh and bone. The most eye-catching thing was a unique ring, with an inlaid sapphire on the hand's pinky finger. The hand's index finger was wreathed in black flames as it pointed at the heart of the wooden puppet. Without a sound, the scene shattered and Klein woke up from his dream. His initial judgment wasn't wrong. Talem had died under a curse. But there was a problem. He had already seen the scene of the curse happening, so why wasn't the scene displayed in its entirety? The mysterious space above the gray fog is able to get rid of all interference. Klein was puzzled for a moment. Normally speaking, receiving a revelation that too abstract and easy to misread was a problem with his limited divination ability. It meant that the difficulty of the matter he was divining was too high, and that it had nothing to do with the gray fog. It was an understandable outcome, but he had clearly seen the scene of the murderous curse, but he was limited to a small scope of the situation. It didn't provide a relatively effective revelation and was rather baffling. Have I encountered such a similar situation in the past? Klein dug through his past experiences. Suddenly he sat up straight, remembering a similar experience. In Tingen, when he was divining the real reason behind the countless coincidences, something similar had happened. He could clearly see the house with the red chimney, but he couldn't reach and see Zangwell and sealed artifact 008. This is the power of someone or something that's at the level of a grade O sealed artifact that's resisting the power of the gray fog. Klein's eyes abruptly narrowed. No, not necessarily. There are still quite a few possibilities. I have to confirm it again. He put in a lot of effort in order to calm down. As for the method used for confirming, it wasn't daunting for the experienced him. The method was simple, redoing the same divination again. If the revelation doesn't change, it means that things aren't so terrible, and if divination is no longer successful, then something around the target or the target is resisting the gray fog to some extent, like 008. Taking a deep breath, Klein calmly repeated the previous divination. The true cause of Talem Dumont's death. He leaned back in his chair and chanted in a low voice, his eyes growing darker. In the dream, all he could see was a hazy, shattered gray fog. There were no more wooden puppets or fingers. Whoosh! Klein straightened his back, his expression abnormally grave. What did Talem get himself involved in? He frowned as he muttered to himself. There's no question as to what I should do next. It's to be passive and perfunctory. I'll first lie to Prince Edisac, before telling him that I'm incapable of figuring out the truth. Phew, this world is really scary. Just the slightest bit of carelessness would cause me to come into contact with something extremely terrifying, Klein sighed. Without daring to stay any longer, he quickly returned to the bathroom in the real world. Tuesday, 9 a.m. at the Crown Cemetery. Klein stood at the edge of the crowd, wearing a black shirt, black vest, and a black tweed coat whilst he was carrying some fresh flowers he bought for 12 soldi. He looked gravely at Talem Dumont's coffin being carried over, had his soul put to rest, and was buried bit by bit into the earth. During this process, Talem's mother's eyes were red and swollen. She wanted to speak a few times, but she couldn't find her voice. His father's hair was gray, and his expression was haggard. He just stood there, trembling slightly. When the scene reflected in his eyes, Klein tilted his head back and closed his eyes. He waited until the mourners had left before he walked over, bent over, and placed the white flowers on top of the others. I'm sorry, he silently said inwardly. Standing up, he stepped aside and was about to leave when Klein noticed reporter Mike and Surgeon Aaron closing in. What a pity. I never thought that Talem would actually sigh. Mike's expression was pained as he couldn't finish his sentence. Aaron, who was always cold, took off his glasses and wiped the corners of his eye. He sighed and said, he's a warm-hearted guy. He shouldn't have ended up like this. Yes, he could have gotten rid of his grandfather's bad reputation, Klein echoed. Just then, he saw a female figure in a thick black dress, with a veil covering her face walk up to Talem's grave. She, too, was also carrying a bouquet of white flower. Klein looked away, not paying much attention, just keeping watch through the corner of his eye. The woman bent down to release the flower, revealing her left palm, which was covered by a black gauze glove. A blue gem faintly appeared on the pinky of her left palm. Klein's scalp tingled instantly. His entire body felt numb. Hivemind's combat style in an instant, Klein switched to his unfathomable state as the fool who overlooked everything. He nodded and said, "Not bad." Ahead of him, the river surged, and the white words squirmed and changed before taking shape again. What follows is the exploration process your loyal servant, Arrows, has recorded. You can choose to speed up or skip certain scenes at any time. This sentence froze for 2 seconds, and then the scene abruptly zoomed in. Klein instantly appeared beside Sir Bernard, but no one noticed him. He looked around and felt that he was surrounded by living people with lifelike scenes. Nothing about his surroundings looked unreal, making him feel as if though he was there in person. I can even speed up or skip certain scenes. The original form of this mirror, Arrows, is a virtual reality family cinema. Klein couldn't help but lampoon. He took another look at the machinery Hivemind members and saw that it was led by an old man in white priest robes and a cleric cap. His face was unusually kind, and his expression was calm and gentle. "Your Grace, everyone is ready," Sir approached the elder and said with a bow. "Archbishop, this is the Archbishop of the Church of Steam and Machinery's Backland Diocese, the demigod Haramic Haydn. The machinery Hivemind really is cautious, and not careless. Who knows, they might have even brought along a grade 1 sealed artifact and performed a divination in advance. After all, they're in control of the mystery prior pathway. Luckily, I can basically confirm that the fog's anti-divination or divination interference abilities are similar to the cards of blasphemy, allowing the result to be as ordinary as possible and the least bit suspicious. Otherwise, certain matters might be exposed. However, there's a certain probability that the meeting between Miss Sharon and I will appear, because, to me, that isn't something harmful. It depends on whether a wraith's instinct to interfere with divination will affect the machinery Hivemind's attempt. Wait, the machinery Hivemind is highly likely to have relied on Arrows, and based on its performance from just now and previously, it isn't impossible for him to curry favor with me by adding some mosaics, Klein thought in enlightenment. At this point, Haramic Haydn drew a triangular sacred emblem on his chest. "Begin the operation. God will protect us." Nearly 10 Bayunders headed down, as Klein followed closely behind. He didn't fast forward at all. He had always been curious about the combat styles of low and mid-sequence Bayunders of the machinery Hivemind, and he wanted to take this opportunity to experience it. In addition, he was also greatly concerned about how a demigod really did in combat, as well as the secrets hidden in the Ammon family tomb. After being ransacked by time, in a period spanning 1,000 or 2,000 years, the black marble staircase still retained its hardness without any signs of corrosion. The machinery Hivemind members followed it all the way underground, where they saw the unique asymmetrical stone pillars and axen blades scuffing from the period of the Fourth Epoch. The pillars stood on either side of the wide road, and in front of them was a large, heavy, dark gray stone bifold door. The stone door had already cracked open, wide enough for 2 people to walk alongside each other. It was completely dark inside. The machinery Hivemind members were in no hurry to enter. They carefully searched the surrounding area with lanterns, but they found nothing of value. According to the plan, the first group will begin with a preliminary cleanup. With the Archbishop's approval, Sir pushed down his hat, compressing his fluffy hair. "Cleanup?" By the side, Klein ruminated over the word. Amidst his puzzlement, the 2 strongest and burliest male machinery Hivemind team members each laid down a long black box on their backs and opened them up. Inside one long box was a sturdy, heavy, iron-black cannon-shaped object. Its surface was engraved with dense and arcane pattern. In the other box was a complex and exquisite firearm, with a chain of pale golden bullets inserted into it. One of the 2 team members carried the cannon-shaped object and trudged to the open stone door. Another machinery Hivemind member picked up the peculiar gun, adjusted the bullet chain, and followed slightly behind. After the 2 of them glanced at each other, the cannon-shaped object on the former's shoulder rapidly lit up, outlining burning patterns and imprints before a loud salvo. Boom! A golden fireball, akin to a miniature sun, flew out from the cannon barrel and into the darkness. Boom! The ground trembled slightly, An intense light was emitted from the crack. The body of the machinery hive mind member, who was holding onto the cannon barrel, clearly sank a little as his feet trembled. Boom, boom, boom. He repeatedly used the Beyonder weapon to launch one golden cannonball after another at different spots, causing the tomb to sway without a speck of dust falling. After he came to a stop, the team member with the peculiar gun stepped forward and pulled the trigger. Duh, 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 duh. The sound of machine gun fire echoed as one pale golden bullet after another flew out, purifying the danger in the depths of the darkness. Isn't this the bombardment effect I've always wanted? Furthermore, they're using Beyonder expendables like purifying bullets and exorcism cannonballs. How extravagant. Is this the combat style of the machinery hive? Klein stared with his eyes wide open and his mouth slightly agape. After the series of savage bombardments, Ikenser raised his voice above the rumbling echoes and said, "Group 2, do the follow-up cleanup." There's more. Klein felt a little numb from what was happening. The second group was also made up of 2 team members who used scrolls made of different kinds of leather. They chanted simplified incantations, activated the scrolls, and tossed them inside. The construct behind the stone door was suddenly shrouded by gentle and pure light. Droplets of golden holy rain pattered down, cleansing everything in the area. Klein looked at this scene and suddenly found it somewhat ridiculous. Wait, aren't you guys here to engage in archaeological study? Aren't you professional archaeologists? Aren't you afraid that the tomb would collapse from using such cleanup method? While these thoughts flashed through his mind, the second team was done, and they shouted at Ikenser, "Deacon, as expected, the construct's structural integrity hasn't been destroyed." They were clearly prepared. "All right, continue forward." Ikenser gave the order. Klein walked in the middle, through the stone door, and saw piles of dirt and debris on the ground. It was impossible to tell what kind of monsters had once been active here, and no one could guess the functions of the mechanisms that had been set up here. After these cleaning up procedures, as long as one didn't dodge in advance, no Beyonder below that of high-sequence Beyonders would be able to withstand it. Klein once again gained a deeper understanding of what the aesthetic of violence was like, and what it meant to be simple, direct, and unreasonable. In what followed, the previous scenes were repeated over and over again. The machinery hivemind team members smoothly approached, exploring one area after another, occasionally harvesting some Beyonder characteristics that were beginning to gather. There are no murals. Seeing the main tomb chamber in sight, the Archbishop of the Church of the God of Steam, Hieramic Haydn, stopped and muttered to himself in puzzlement. Klein, who was considered half a historian, was equally puzzled. Generally speaking, a noble family member's grave would more or less express their position and honor when they were alive. And when a grave became a tomb or even a mausoleum, it was very common for a mural to be used to describe its master's life when it possessed enough space. In even older and more obscure eras, this wasn't rare, and it was even the most common method. The first thing humans learned was drawings, not writing. Thus, it really was a little strange that there were no similar murals in the tomb of a fourth epic noble family. Upon hearing the Archbishop's question, Ikenser immediately ordered the men to spread out in groups of 2 to search the vicinity for relevant traces of mural. Watching from the sidelines, Klein couldn't help but want to fast forward a little to immediately see the outcome. At that moment, he noticed that the 2 machinery hivemind members in the left corner had suddenly turned into 3. One of them looked identical to Ikenser Bernard, his fluffy hair propping his hat high. This, Klein was first stunned before he made a guess. The moment he had the thought, Ikenser walked over to the team member closest to him. "Any discoveries?" He cleared his throat and lowered his voice. The team member turned around warily, but immediately relaxed when he saw that it was Deacon Ikenser. "No." Before he could finish his sentence, the Ikenser in front of him suddenly turned into a piece of human skin and enveloped his body. The pale human skin tightly wrapped around him, and his face began to form the outline of his facial feature. During this process, there were no additional sounds, nor were there any abnormal movements that were triggered. All of a sudden, the human skin began to emit rays of light, just like the rising of the sun. Human skin immediately turned translucent and quickly soared into the air, as if it was being burned. A black whip immediately lashed out, striking its body, causing its movements to clearly slow down. In such a battle, slowness was an original sin. One Beyonder weapon after another, burning scrolls and pale golden bullets were released towards the human skin. After a brilliant burst of light, countless ashes fell from the sky. All of them coruscated faint light and slowly struggled to gather together. It really is a human-skinned shadow. Klein turned his attention to the machinery hive mind members who had just been attacked. The man pulled at his collar and pulled out a protective charm. There were many symbols and magic labels related to the sun on it. Thankfully, the Archbishop got us to wear these things. He held the lantern and sincerely prayed. It was only then that Klein realized that his brooch had the quality of the night, his ring had the intensity of the storm, and his belt exuded the sense of physical strength. Although they aren't all mystical items, most of them are in the category of charms and Beyonder weapons. Even if their effects will quickly decline, they're still worth a lot. If you weren't an artisan or a rich Beyonder, there's no way to gather that much. Is this the combat style of the machinery hive? Burning money, Klein felt a sudden setback, and it took him a long time to recover. At that moment, the human-skinned shadow characteristic gathered and took form. It was like a huge diamond with countless sides reflecting light, and each side reflected a different face. The faces were densely packed, layered, and left one dizzy. I'm just short of it, Klein was overjoyed. After the machinery hive mind handled the spoils, they continued to search for the murals, but they didn't find any traces of them. They had no choice but to gather again and head for the passageway that led to the main tomb. After another series of bombardments, the passage into the main tomb was revealed to the members of the machinery hive. The ground was littered with debris. The diamond-shaped Beyonder characteristic that reflected a human face lay silently at the bottom of the right wall, glowing with the light of two other objects. The entire tunnel, including the two walls that lined the sides and the stone ceiling, was filled with potholes. However, one thing remained undamaged. It was a frame that was hung up ahead about 7 meters away. It was brown in color, and the wood grain was obvious, but only the side of the frame was revealed. Without anyone mentioning anything, all the Beyonders present could tell that it was strange. At this moment, the Archbishop of the Church of Steam and Machinery, Hieronymus Haydn, stepped forward and said in a gentle voice, "This is likely to be the specter portrait frame that belongs to the Ammon family according to the record. As long as one walks into its range and is illuminated by it, their spirit body will instantly be separated from their flesh and blood, turning into a portrait and be forever sealed inside. In this state, even if the portrait is replaced, there is no way of rescuing the person without the corresponding method. Tf the duration of being sealed is too long. The body would already be dead then. Even if one grasps the correct method to remove the seal, the spirit will quickly dissipate." As he spoke, Hieronymus moved forward, step by step, closing in on the strange frame. Klein was a bit worried, not daring to watch the demigod fight against the sealed artifact, but he quickly realized that he was just watching a scene provided by the magic mirror, arrows. What was there to be afraid of? This is very normal. It's just like watching a horror movie or playing a dark game. Klein calmed himself as he quickened his pace and caught up with Hieronymus Haydn. The demigod archbishop quickly reached the confines of where the mystical item that needed to be sealed was. He wore a white priest robe and a clerical cap, and his figure gradually appeared in the glass on the surface of the picture frame. Glass in the fourth epoch. Seems to be the case. There has at least been glass in the fifth epoch's history all this time, and there has been no mention of who invented it. Klein waited with great interest for the battle between the demigod and the strange sealed artifact. Hieronymus' upper body fully appeared within the specter portrait frame, but his eyes didn't lose their luster. He walked toward the frame, face to face. The silhouette within the painting flickered, as though it was constantly shrinking, yet it was unable to succeed. Hieronymus stopped, took out a large, almost opaque black cloth he had long prepared, and he covered the specter portrait frame. The frame trembled a few times, but in the end, it was completely covered by the black cloth and turned silent. Hieronymus seemed to be unaffected as he effortlessly removed the specter portrait frame and finished wrapping it with the black cloth before tying a knot on its back. This isn't mystic. Didn't you say that your spirit body would be absorbed into the frame and be turned into a portrait? Why is the archbishop fine? Is this the uniqueness of a demigod, or is it because of another reason? Klein sized up Hieronymus Haydn, but he didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. His eyes are filled with spirit, his expression genial, and he's rich in flesh and blood. It's a pity that I'm not there in person. Otherwise, I could activate my spirit vision and have a look. Klein retracted his gaze and waited for the machinery hivemind members, such as Ikenser, to come over. Haramic handed the specter portrait frame to a member of the team and walked towards the main tomb at the end of the passage. There was a black stone door, filled with scrapes carved by blades and axes. In the middle of the door was a grayish-white disc. The surface of the disc was divided into 12 segments. There was a black needle, just like a clock from the outside world. However, the segments weren't evenly distributed across the disc. They were of varying sizes and extremely incongruous. Furthermore, each grid had half of its surface covered in a shadow. The coat of arms of the Ammon family. Archbishop Haramic made a brief introduction. He didn't explain the symbolic meaning of the coat of arms, because presently only Deacon Ikenser Bernard was qualified to know. Klein, on the other hand, relied on his own knowledge of mysticism to attempt to decipher it. Disc 12 segments and a needle. Combined together, they clearly represent time. It matches the worm of time, which Ammon's avatar left behind after it was wiped out. What should be 12 equal segments on a disc are unequal in size, and there's a shadow over a portion of it. Does this mean that the Ammon family is the dark side of time? Then, where does their title as a blasphemer family show itself? While Klein was thinking, Archbishop Haramic pushed open the stone door without any protection. The heavy stone door opened, revealing an extremely spacious tomb chamber. In the center of the chamber was a dais with a deep black coffin on top of it. The surrounding walls were decorated with iron lampstands, each holding a burning white candle. All the candles didn't flicker. It was so quiet that it seemed like a scene that was fixed in place, completely devoid of any signs of it suffering the effects of time that spanned 1 to 2,000 years. On the straight path from the stone door to the coffin, there were corpses lying on the ground. They were all wearing black tweed coats, half-top hats, or even ordinary worker clothes with a cap on their heads. It was obvious that they had entered in recent years. The Beyonders that previously recruited helpers. How did they get past the area at the front? Human-skinned Shadow and the other monsters were clearly still alive. With a mind filled with questions, Klein looked at the corpses. What he saw left him immediately shocked. The corpses all had sparse white hair, dry and wrinkled skin, and obvious markings on their skin. They looked like 80 or 90-year-olds. There were no obvious wounds on their bodies, as though they had died of old age. Furthermore, it appeared as though they had died recently and hadn't even rotted yet. It's very obvious that there wouldn't be this many aged Beyonders exploring the tomb. Even if the discoverers of the tomb were old, they would still try their best to choose the young and strong when recruiting helpers. There's something odd about it. Klein frowned and looked around again. He quickly thought of the worm of time left behind by Ammon's avatar, and the coat of arms of the Ammon family that represented time on the stone door. Making people age rapidly is one of the Ammon family's Beyonder powers. The dark side of time, the loophole in time, could it be that as others rapidly age, the members of the Ammon family would regain their youth and extend their lives? Wait a minute, for these Beyonders to easily barge into this place like that, perhaps it was deliberate on the tomb master's part. He wanted to rob them of their time in order to maintain his own existence. Klein looked suspiciously at the black coffin on the platform. At this moment, the demigod, Haramic Haydn, raised his left hand and pressed it down. "You will stop here." "Yes, your grace," Ikenser and company answered without any hesitation. As members of an official organization, they had read up on a large number of past Beyonder events. They knew that under similar circumstances, they had to obey the will of a high-sequence Beyonder and absolutely couldn't act rashly or else they would die without knowing how. Haramic looked ahead, and his eyes fell on a picture frame that hung upside down at the bottom of the dais. His expression didn't change as he continued to walk forward at a leisurely pace, not making any preparations at all. The hallmark of demigods is to be rash. Klein was stunned. He seemed to be able to imagine Haramic's teeth dropping, his white hair wilting, and his skin shriveling as he rapidly aged. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. Haramic, who seemed fine, suddenly trembled, and a sharp and piercing grinding sound could be heard from his body. His pace began to slow down, his movements became stiff, and his skin visibly dried up. There's something wrong with that. That isn't the aging process of a normal human being. What was that grinding sound just now? Klein muttered inwardly. 4 steps, 5 steps, 6 steps. Ripping sounds came from Haramic's body as something fell to the ground. Klein subconsciously looked over and saw a gear. a gear covered in rust. Haramek continued on, as items kept dropping from his body from time to time. There were rusty screws, melted wax, yellowed bones, and loose springs. His figure became increasingly thin and unsteady, as if it could collapse at any time. This is just like a robot, well, in this era's terms. Like a living doll, Klein was suddenly in light. He remembered that before old Neil died, he had said that the Church of Earth Mother's Sequence 4 was good at alchemical life, and that the Savant Pathway's corresponding sequence was barely able to do so too. As for Haramek, he was a high-sequence Bayunder of the Savant Pathway. Haramek in front of me isn't the real him, it's just a refined doll. Just now, the reason why the Spectre portrait frame was ineffective was that a doll doesn't have a spirit body. The real Haramek should still be far away, as expected of a demigod. Amidst Klein's enlightenment, the Archbishop walked up to the dais, bent his knees and back, and turned the upside-down frame over. Generally speaking, when exploring a tomb involving Bayunder elements, it was necessary to avoid flipping items over, but this time, Haramek had made the opposite choice. Following the flipping of the portrait frame, a wind suddenly blew in the sealed tomb, dispersing the formless imprisonment in silence. The candles on the iron-colored light fixtures rapidly ignited, becoming unusually bright. However, they soon reached the end of their lives and melted away. The old corpses on the ground rapidly rotted and stank. In just a few seconds, the tomb's main chamber had turned dark, leaving only the lanterns that the machinery hivemind members were holding onto to barely illuminate the area ahead. Haramek picked up the picture frame from the floor and went up the stairs to the dais. He came to the black coffin, stretched out his right palm, and forcefully pushed. Creak. The heavy coffin lid opened up a crack with a creaking sound, as though it wasn't nailed shut at all. Haramek looked down and said in the same unchanging voice, "There's no corpse." As the scene drew nearer, Klein saw that the coffin's interior was empty, except for a pale gold cushion embroidered with a worm with 12 rings. At that moment, Haramek turned around, and the picture frame in his hand was reflected in the eyes of Ikancer and the others. With just a glance, Klein's gaze suddenly froze. It was a portrait of a smiling young man. He had black eyes and curly black hair. He had a broad forehead and a thin face. A crystal monocle hung over his eye. He wore a black pointed hat. Ammon,